The woman stumbling through the Montana blizzard had given up praying for rescue when she saw the orange glow flickering between the pine trees, a beacon in the white hell that had swallowed her whole 3 hours ago. Penelope Barrett's fingers had stopped hurting an hour back, which she knew meant frostbite had set in, and her legs moved more from stubborn will than actual strength. The snow had come fast and furious as she'd ridden away from the stage-coach station in Taylor, trying to reach the next town before nightfall. Her horse had thrown her when lightning split a tree, then bolted into the storm, leaving her with nothing but the thin coat on her back and boots that were meant for walking wooden sidewalks, not trudging through knee-deep snow in January of 1884. The fire grew larger as she pushed forward, and she could make out a crude shelter built against a rock face, canvas stretched between trees to create a windbreak. A man sat beneath it, his back to her, feeding logs into the flames. Penelope tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, stolen by the wind. She took another step, and her legs finally gave out. She collapsed face first into the snow, and the cold that had been gnawing at her extremities suddenly felt warm, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a very bad sign. Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow. Strong hands gripped her shoulders and turned her over. Through the haze clouding her vision, she saw a face she would never forget, rugged and weathered like the Montana landscape itself, with eyes the color of amber and dark hair that fell past his collar. He had a thick beard and snowflakes clung to it as he leaned over her. "Jesus," he muttered, and then he was lifting her, carrying her toward the fire as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. The heat hit her skin like knives, and she gasped, coming back to herself enough to feel everything at once. Her hands, her feet, her face, all screaming as blood tried to flow back into frozen tissue. "I know it hurts," the man said, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through her pain. "But that means you are not too far gone. Stay with me." He set her down close to the fire, then moved with swift efficiency, pulling off her soaked boots and stockings. Penelope knew she should protest, should care about propriety, but she was beyond such concerns. He wrapped her feet in what looked like a spare shirt, then did the same with her hands after peeling off her gloves. "We need to get you out of that coat," he said. "It is wet through. You will not warm up while wearing it." Penelope nodded, her teeth chattering too violently to speak. He helped her out of the coat and her outer dress, leaving her in her chemise and petticoat, then wrapped a thick wool blanket around her shoulders. He added more wood to the fire until it roared, then sat back on his heels, studying her with those intense amber eyes. "What in God's name are you doing out here alone?" he asked. "Stagecoach," she managed through chattering teeth. "Changed in T. Taylor. Tried to make it to H. Helena before dark. Horse threw me." He shook his head, but there was no judgment in his expression, only concern. "Helena is 20 miles from Taylor. You would never have made it before this storm hit, even with a horse." "I know that end now," she said. He pulled a tin cup from his pack and filled it with water from a canteen, then set it near the edge of the fire to warm. "I am Kieran Ellis," he said. "I have been tracking a mountain lion that has been killing cattle on the ranches near Taylor. Plan to head back tomorrow when the storm clears." "Penelope Barrett," she replied. Her shivering was starting to ease, though her extremities still burned. "I am supposed to start teaching at the school in Helena next week." "A teacher," Kieran said, and something shifted in his expression, though she could not quite read what it meant. He retrieved the cup and handed it to her. "Drink slowly." The warm water felt like heaven sliding down her throat. She drank half the cup before lowering it, finally able to look around at the camp Kieran had made. It was surprisingly well organized, with his saddle and gear stacked neatly under the canvas shelter, his horse tied securely to a tree behind them, a large bay that watched them with calm, intelligent eyes. "You saved my life," Penelope said quietly. Kieran shrugged. "Anyone would have done the same. But you were the one here. You built this fire if I had not seen it." She trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. "But you did see it," he said firmly, "so there is no use dwelling on what might have been." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl through the trees and the fire crackle. Penelope studied Kieran when she thought he was not looking. He appeared to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30, with the lean, hard build of a man who spent his life outdoors. His clothes were well worn but clean, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in the wilderness. "How long have you been a tracker?" she asked, more to fill the silence than from genuine curiosity, though she found she was interested in his answer. "Since I was 14, he said. "My father was a trapper, taught me everything about reading sign, following trails. After he died, I hired myself out to ranchers and lawmen. It is honest work and I am good at it." "Where are you from originally?" "Pennsylvania, but we moved west when I was young. My mother died on the trail." He said it matter-of-factly, but Penelope heard the old pain underneath. "My father and I drifted for years before settling in Montana Territory. That was back in '73. Penelope did the math in her head. "That would make him around 29 or 30, she guessed. A decade older than her own 19 years, but not so much that it seemed strange to be sitting here talking to him. "I am sorry about your mother," she said. Kieran nodded. "It was a long time ago. What about you?" "What brings a young teacher all the way to Montana?" "Opportunity," Penelope said. "And perhaps a bit of running away if I am being honest." "From what?" She hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding the truth. She would likely never see this man again after tomorrow. "From expectations. My father wanted me to marry a man twice my age, a banker in Philadelphia with money and position. I wanted to make my own choices, live my own life. So when I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Helena, I applied without telling anyone. By the time my father found out I had been accepted, I had already bought my train ticket. He must have been angry. Furious, Penelope confirmed. But I am 20, not a child anymore. I have a right to make my own decisions." Kieran smiled, and the expression transformed his face, softening the hard edges. "I imagine you are quite stubborn when you set your mind to something." "I have been told that, yes," she admitted, smiling back. The storm continued to rage around them, but the shelter held firm, and the fire kept them warm. Kieran pulled out hardtack and jerky from his pack, offering half to Penelope. She had not realized how hungry she was until she bit into the tough, dried meat. "Not exactly a fancy Philadelphia dinner," Kieran observed. "Right now, it tastes better than anything I have ever eaten," Penelope said honestly. As they ate, Kieran told her about Montana, about the vast spaces and the way the light looked on the mountains at sunset, about the harsh winters and the brief, glorious summers. He spoke with such love for this wild land that Penelope found herself drawn in, imagining what it would be like to belong to a place so completely. "You really love it here," she said. "I do," he agreed. "It is not easy, but it is honest. A man can make something of himself here through hard work and determination, not because of who his family is or how much money he has." "Is that why you stayed?" "Because you wanted to make your own way." "Partly," Kieran said, "but mostly because this is the first place that ever felt like home." Penelope understood that. She had never felt entirely at home in Philadelphia, always chafing against the restrictions placed on her because of her gender and her age, always wanting more than the narrow life laid out before her. Maybe Montana could be home for her too. The wind shifted, blowing snow into their shelter. Kieran adjusted the canvas, securing it more tightly, then added more wood to the fire. "You should try to get some sleep," he said. "We have a long walk back to Taylor tomorrow and you will need your strength. What about you?" "I will keep the fire going. And listen for that mountain lion, though I doubt it will be hunting in this weather." Penelope wanted to protest, to insist he needed rest too, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide. She lay down close to the fire, the blanket wrapped tightly around her, and within minutes she was asleep. She woke several times during the night, disoriented and cold despite the fire. Each time, she found Kieran awake, feeding the flames or checking on her feet and hands to make sure the circulation was returning properly. Once, when she woke shivering violently, he moved closer and wrapped his own blanket around her as well, his solid presence at her back radiating warmth. "Sleep," he murmured. "I have you." And she did, falling back into dreamless darkness with those words echoing in her mind. Dawn broke clear and brutally cold, the storm having passed in the night. Penelope woke to find herself alone by the fire, Kieran's blanket still around her shoulders. She sat up, her whole body aching, and saw him returning from the direction of his horse, carrying something. "How do you feel?" he asked, setting down what she now saw was her dried clothing. "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle," she admitted, "but alive thanks to you." He smiled slightly. "Can you walk? We should start back as soon as you are dressed. It is going to be slow going through the snow." Penelope flexed her feet and hands experimentally. They hurt, but the feeling had returned completely. "I think so." Kieran turned his back politely while she dressed in her now dry clothes, though they were stiff from being hung near the fire all night. Her boots were still damp, but there was nothing to be done about that. When she was decent, Kieran packed up his camp with practiced efficiency, loading everything onto his horse. "Can your horse carry both of us?" Penelope asked, eyeing the bay. "Duke can handle it, but the snow is too deep in places. We will walk and he will carry the gear." They set out with the sun barely above the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and Penelope found herself grateful to be alive to see it, despite the difficulty of the trek ahead. The going was as hard as Kieran had predicted. The snow came up to their knees in most places, and they had to move slowly to avoid hidden obstacles. Kieran went first, breaking trail, and Penelope followed in his footsteps, concentrating on putting one foot in front of the other. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when Kieran held up his hand, signaling her to stop. He stood perfectly still, his head tilted, listening. "What is it?" Penelope whispered. "Horses," he said quietly. "Coming fast." A minute later, 3 riders appeared through the trees, pushing their horses hard through the snow. They pulled up short when they saw Kieran and Penelope, and the man in front, heavyset with a sheriff's badge on his coat, called out, "Kieran Ellis." "That is me," Kieran confirmed. "Thank God. We have been searching since the storm cleared. You are tracking that big cat, right? It hit the Morrison ranch last night, killed 2 calves and mauled one of the ranch hands. He will live, but he is torn up bad. We need you to find that animal before it kills someone." Kieran's jaw tightened. "I was bringing Miss Barrett back to Taylor first. She was caught in the storm and needs to get somewhere warm." The sheriff looked at Penelope for the first time, his expression softening. "Miss, are you hurt?" "Just cold and tired," Penelope said, "but I can manage if Mr. Ellis needs to go." "Tom here can take you back to town," the sheriff said, gesturing to one of the other men, a young deputy with a kind face. "Kieran, we really need you. That cat is getting bolder, and with winter this harsh, it is going to keep coming after livestock and people." Kieran looked torn, glancing between Penelope and the sheriff. "I gave my word to see Miss Barrett safely to town. And I will make sure she gets there," the deputy said. "You have my word on that, Kieran." Penelope could see the conflict in Kieran's eyes, and she stepped forward, touching his arm lightly. "Go," she said. "A man is hurt. I will be fine with the deputy." "You are certain?" "I am certain," she said firmly, though her heart sank at the thought of parting from him so abruptly. "You saved my life. The least I can do is not keep you from helping others." Kieran studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He turned to the deputy. "Get her warm and fed, and make sure she sees a doctor about her hands and feet." "I will," the young man promised. Kieran unloaded his pack from Duke and transferred some of his gear to the sheriff's pack horse. Then he turned back to Penelope, and for a moment she thought he was going to just nod and leave. Instead, he took her hand in his grip warm and strong. "I am glad I found you," he said quietly. "Or that you found me, rather." "So am I," Penelope replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. She wanted to say more, to thank him properly, to ask if she would see him again, but the moment passed. Kieran released her hand, swung up onto Duke, and followed the sheriff and the other rider back along the trail they had broken. Penelope watched until they disappeared into the trees, feeling an unexpected sense of loss. "Come on, miss," the deputy said gently. "Let us get you to town." The ride back to Taylor took less than an hour, with Penelope riding double behind the deputy. They arrived to find the small town bustling despite the early hour, people digging out from the storm and checking on their neighbors. The deputy brought her to the boarding house where the stagecoach company put up stranded travelers, and paid for 2 nights' lodging out of his own pocket when Penelope admitted her purse had been lost when her horse bolted. "Kieran would have my hide if I did not make sure you were taken care of," he said with a smile. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, a practical woman with Chinese ancestry and no patience for foolishness, took one look at Penelope and herded her upstairs to a room with a fire already burning. She brought hot water for washing, a clean nightgown, and a tray laden with eggs, bacon, bread, and coffee. "You eat every bite," Mrs. Chen ordered. "Then you sleep. Doctor will come by this afternoon to check on you." Penelope was too grateful to argue. She ate everything on the tray, washed the grime and fear from her skin, and fell into the clean, soft bed. She slept for 6 hours straight, not waking until Mrs. Chen knocked to announce the doctor's arrival. Dr. Patterson was a gruff older man who examined her hands and feet thoroughly, pronouncing that while she would have some pain and sensitivity for a few weeks, she had avoided any permanent damage. "You were lucky," he said. "Another hour out in that storm and it would have been a different story." "I know," Penelope said quietly, thinking of Kieran and his fire, his shelter, his steady presence through the night. She spent the next day recovering, venturing downstairs only for meals. The stagecoach company sent word that service to Helena would resume the day after next, and they would provide her passage at no cost since she had lost her ticket in the accident. Mrs. Chen assured her the cost of her room was covered as well. "The deputy made sure of it," she said. "That boy is sweet on you, I think." "It was not him who arranged it," Penelope said. "It was his friend, the tracker." Mrs. Chen gave her a knowing look. "Ah, Kieran Ellis. He is a good man, that one. Hard life, but it made him strong, not bitter. You know him." "Everyone in Taylor knows Kieran. He has tracked for most of the ranchers around here at one time or another. Always fair, always honest, and handsome too, though he does not seem to notice when the young ladies try to catch his eye." She studied Penelope. "But maybe he would notice a pretty teacher from back east." Penelope felt her cheeks heat. "I will be leaving for Helena soon, and he is out tracking a dangerous animal. I doubt our paths will cross again. But she found herself hoping they would, more than she wanted to admit. That evening, Penelope borrowed paper and pen from Mrs. Chen and wrote a letter to her father. She kept it brief, explaining that she had arrived safely in Montana and would be taking up her teaching position in Helena as planned. She did not mention the storm or nearly freezing to death, knowing it would only fuel his arguments that she should come home. She posted the letter the next morning, along with one to the headmaster of the Helena school explaining her delay. She was sitting in the boarding house parlor that afternoon, reading a week-old newspaper when the deputy appeared at the door, hat in hand. "Miss Barrett," he said, "I have news about Kieran." Penelope's heart jumped into her throat. She set down the paper. "Is he all right?" "He is fine," the deputy assured her quickly. "Better than fine, actually. He tracked that mountain lion to a canyon about 15 miles north of here. Got it with one clean shot. The ranchers are so grateful they took up a collection, gave him $200 as a reward." Relief flooded through her. "That is wonderful news. He is on his way back now, should be here by nightfall." The deputy hesitated. "I thought you would want to know, seeing as how he saved your life and all." "Thank you for telling me," Penelope said warmly. The deputy nodded and left, and Penelope tried to go back to her newspaper. But she found herself reading the same paragraph over and over, her mind elsewhere. She was being foolish, she told herself. Kieran had simply done what any decent person would have done. The fact that she had not been able to stop thinking about him for 2 days meant nothing. She was grateful, that was all. But when she heard horses outside just as the sun was setting, she could not stop herself from going to the window. She watched as Kieran dismounted in front of the general store across the street, Duke's reins in hand, looking tired but unharmed. The shopkeeper came out and shook his hand enthusiastically, obviously having heard about the successful hunt. Penelope watched Kieran nod and smile politely, but even from a distance she could see the weariness in the set of his shoulders. On impulse, she grabbed her shawl and hurried downstairs and out the door before she could talk herself out of it. She crossed the street, dodging a wagon, and approached just as the shopkeeper was finally releasing Kieran's hand. Kieran turned and saw her, and something shifted in his expression, the fatigue falling away. "Miss Barrett," he said, "you are still in town." "The stage does not leave until tomorrow morning," she explained. "I heard you got the mountain lion. Congratulations." "Just doing my job," he said, but she could hear the satisfaction underneath. "How are you feeling? Any lasting effects from your ordeal?" "None, thanks to you." "The doctor said I was lucky." "We both were," Kieran said. "If I had not decided to make camp in that particular spot, if the wind had not been blowing just right for you to see my fire." He shook his head. "Luck indeed." They stood there in the street, and Penelope became aware that several people were watching them with open curiosity. "Would you like to get some dinner?" she asked impulsively. "As a thank you. The hotel has a dining room." Kieran looked surprised, then pleased. "I would like that." "Let me get Duke settled at the livery first. I can meet you there in half an hour." "That sounds perfect." Penelope hurried back to the boarding house to change into her good dress, the deep blue one with the ivory lace at the collar. She pinned her blonde hair up carefully and pinched her cheeks for color, then stopped and stared at herself in the mirror. What was she doing? She was leaving tomorrow, starting a new life in Helena. Getting attached to a tracker in Taylor was not part of her plan. But she went to the hotel dining room anyway. Kieran was waiting outside, cleaned up and wearing a fresh shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. He offered his arm and she took it, and they went inside together. The dining room was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps providing warm light. They ordered the special, which turned out to be beef stew and fresh bread and coffee to drink. "Tell me about the hunt," Penelope said when they were settled. "If you do not mind talking about it." Kieran shrugged. "Not much to tell. Tracked it to a box canyon where it had made a den, waited for it to come out at dusk when the big cats usually hunt, and took my shot. It was quick, no suffering." "Were you afraid?" "A healthy respect for what a mountain lion can do, yes. But not afraid exactly. I have done this many times before." He paused. "Though I will admit I was more careful than usual. I kept thinking about how I had promised to keep you safe, and how I needed to finish the job and get back to make sure that promise had been kept." His words warmed her more than the hot coffee. "The deputy was very kind, and Mrs. Chen at the boarding house has been wonderful." "Mrs. Chen is good people," Kieran agreed. "Her husband died 2 years back, and she has run that boarding house alone ever since. Works harder than any 2 men." They talked through dinner, the conversation flowing easily. Kieran asked about her teaching position, and Penelope found herself describing her hopes for the school, how she wanted to make learning exciting for her students, not just rote memorization. Kieran listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions. "My mother was a teacher," he said at one point. "Back in Pennsylvania before we headed west. She taught me to read before I could even walk properly, or so my father said. I think that is why I—" He trailed off, looking uncertain. "Why you what?" Penelope prompted gently. "Why I have always respected teachers. You do important work, shaping young minds. My mother believed education was the key to everything, that it could lift people out of poverty and ignorance. She died before she could see me grow up, but I have tried to live by her principles." "She would be proud of you," Penelope said. "You are a good man, Kieran Ellis." He looked uncomfortable with the praise and changed the subject. "What will you do in Helena?" "Just teach, or do you have other plans?" "I have not thought that far ahead, honestly. I was so focused on just getting here, on proving to my father and myself that I could make my own way. But I suppose I should think about the future." "You have plenty of time for that," Kieran said. "You are young yet." "I am 20, Penelope said, a touch defensively. "Hardly a child." "I did not mean it that way," Kieran said quickly. "I just meant you have your whole life ahead of you. No need to have everything figured out right now." They finished their meal, and Kieran insisted on paying, despite Penelope's protests that she had invited him. "You can buy me dinner next time," he said, then looked surprised at his own words, as if he had not meant to say them out loud. "Next time," Penelope repeated softly. "Will there be a next time?" Kieran walked her back to the boarding house through the cold, clear night. The stars were brilliant overhead, and their breath made white clouds in the freezing air. At the door, he stopped and turned to face her. "I want there to be," he said honestly. "A next time, I mean, but you are going to Helena and I." He gestured vaguely. "I move around a lot, go where the work takes me. I am not sure what I can offer you." Penelope's heart was pounding. This was it, the moment where she could play it safe, say goodbye, move on with her planned life. But she had not come all the way to Montana to play it safe. "You offered me your fire when I was freezing," she said quietly. "You offered me shelter and safety and your own blankets to keep me warm. That is not nothing, Kieran. It felt like nothing at the time. Basic human decency, that is all." "It was everything to me," Penelope said. She reached out and took his hand, feeling bold. "I know we barely know each other. I know this is probably foolish, but I feel like I need to say it anyway. These past few days, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. About how kind you were, how capable, how safe I felt with you. And I know I am leaving tomorrow and you have your life here, but I do not want to walk away without you knowing that." Kieran stared at her, his amber eyes reflecting the lamplight from the boarding house window. "Penelope," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. I have not stopped thinking about you either. When I was out there tracking that cat, you were in my head the whole time, but I do not have much to offer. I live rough, travel constantly. You deserve stability, a real home. I left everything behind to come here and make my own choices, Penelope said. If I wanted stability and a predictable life, I would have married that banker in Philadelphia. What I want is to feel alive, to matter, to be with someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession. Helena is only 20 miles from Taylor, Kieran said slowly, as if thinking it through as he spoke. I could visit. When I am not working, I could come see you. You could, Penelope agreed, hope blooming in her chest. But that is not enough, Kieran said, and her hope faltered for a moment before he continued. I do not want to visit sometimes. I want. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. This is crazy. We met 3 days ago, I know. You could die out here, nearly did already. I know that too. I have nothing to give you, Kieran said, his voice raw. No house, no settled life, nothing a woman should want. Penelope thought about the fire and the storm, the way he had wrapped her in blankets, the steadiness of his presence through the long night. She thought about his smile and the way he talked about this wild land he loved, the honor in how he lived his life. She thought about how she felt when she was with him, like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Give me tomorrow, she said. Kieran blinked. What? You say you have nothing to give me, so give me tomorrow. Come to Helena with me on the stage. Spend the day helping me get settled. And then if you still think this is crazy, if you still think we are making a mistake, you can leave and we will say goodbye properly. And if I do not think it is a mistake, then we will figure it out, together. Kieran pulled her close, and Penelope went willingly, wrapping her arms around him as he held her tight. She could feel his heart pounding against her cheek where it rested on his chest. Tomorrow, he said into her hair. And the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as you will have me. Penelope tilted her face up and Kieran kissed her, soft and gentle at first, then deeper, his hand cupping the back of her head. She had been kissed before, clumsy attempts by boys at church socials, but this was nothing like that. This was fire and lightning and coming home all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. I am going to court you properly, he said. No matter what anyone says about how fast this is happening, I am going to do this right. I would expect nothing less, Penelope said, smiling. They stood there in the cold for a while longer, neither wanting to let go, before Mrs. Chen opened the door and cleared her throat meaningfully. Miss Barrett, you will catch your death standing out here. And Mr. Ellis, while I am sure your intentions are honorable, the neighbors will talk if you keep her out here much longer. Yes, madam, Kieran said, stepping back but keeping hold of Penelope's hand. I will see you tomorrow morning then. The stage leaves at 8. I will be ready, Penelope promised. She went inside and up to her room, but she did not sleep for hours, too full of hope and possibility and the memory of that kiss. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Penelope packed her few belongings and said goodbye to Mrs. Chen, who hugged her and whispered, You hold on to that man. He is one of the good ones. Kieran was waiting by the stage when Penelope arrived, Duke tied nearby. He had clearly been up early, because he had already secured passage for himself, and arranged for his horse to be transported to Helena along with the mail wagon that would follow the stage. You are certain about this? Penelope asked as he helped her into the coach. More certain than I have been about anything in a long time, Kieran replied. The ride to Helena took most of the day, with one stop to change horses and let the passengers stretch their legs. There were 4 other people in the coach, 2 married couples heading to Helena for business, and they eyed Kieran and Penelope with curiosity, but did not pry. They arrived in Helena as the sun was setting, and Penelope got her first look at what would be her new home. It was larger than Taylor, with brick buildings lining the main street and actual sidewalks. The mountains loomed in the background, snow-capped and majestic. Kieran retrieved his horse and Penelope's bag, and they made their way to the address she had been given for her lodgings. It turned out to be a neat house on a quiet street, run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher who rented rooms to single working women. Mrs. Fletcher was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who looked Kieran up and down when he carried in Penelope's bag. "Your brother?" she asked pointedly. "A friend," Penelope said. "He helped me when I was caught in the storm near Taylor." Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened. "Ah, we heard about that storm. Terrible business. Well, any friend of Miss Barrett's is welcome for supper. I imagine you are both hungry after that journey." Over a meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, Penelope explained her situation to Mrs. Fletcher, who turned out to be much warmer than her stern exterior suggested. She told them about the school, which was 2 streets over, and the headmaster, Mr. Wilson, who was a fair man if a bit traditional in his views. "He will expect you to present yourself tomorrow morning," Mrs. Fletcher said, "to discuss the curriculum and meet the other teachers. There are 3 others at the school, all men, so you will be the first woman on staff." "I am ready for the challenge," Penelope said, though she felt a flutter of nerves. After dinner, Kieran walked her out to the porch. The other boarders had already retired, giving them a moment of privacy. "I should find a place to stay tonight," Kieran said. "There is a boarding house for men near the livery. I saw it when we rode in." "And tomorrow?" Penelope asked. "Tomorrow I will come by and walk you to the school if you would like the company after that." He shrugged. "I will need to find work. I sent word to some of the ranchers around Helena before we left Taylor, letting them know I would be in the area. Hopefully someone needs a tracker. And if they do not, then I will find something else. I am not picky about work as long as it is honest." He touched her cheek gently. "I meant what I said, Penelope. I am not going anywhere," she believed him. "Good." He kissed her goodnight, sweet and lingering, then headed down the street toward the men's boarding house. Penelope watched until he disappeared around a corner, then went inside, feeling lighter than she had in years. The next morning, true to his word, Kieran appeared just as Penelope was finishing breakfast. He had cleaned up and shaved, and in the clear morning light he looked younger, less weathered. Mrs. Fletcher invited him in for coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table while Penelope gathered her things. "So you are a tracker," Mrs. Fletcher said conversationally. "That is unusual work." "It suits me," Kieran replied. "I am good at it, and it pays well when there is work to be had." "And what are your intentions toward Miss Barrett, if you do not mind my asking?" Penelope froze halfway up the stairs, straining to hear Kieran's response. "To marry her if she will have me," Kieran said calmly. "Though I know it is soon and I need to court her properly first, I want to do this right." "Good answer," Mrs. Fletcher said, and Penelope could hear the approval in her voice. When they set out for the school, Penelope took Kieran's arm, her heart full. "You told Mrs. Fletcher you want to marry me," she said. "You heard that, did you?" Kieran looked embarrassed. "Too much, too soon." "No," Penelope said firmly. "Not too much, not too soon. Just honest, and I appreciate that." The school was a white wooden building with a bell tower, surrounded by a yard where children could play. Penelope's nerves returned full force as they approached, but Kieran squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You are going to be wonderful," he said. "Those children are lucky to have you." Mr. Wilson turned out to be a balding man in his 50s with wire-rimmed spectacles and a kind smile. He welcomed Penelope warmly and did not seem put off by Kieran's presence when she explained he was a friend who had helped her after the storm. "Terrible luck, that," Mr. Wilson said. But you are here now, and that is what matters. Let me show you the classroom and introduce you to the other teachers." Kieran waited outside while Penelope toured the school. Her classroom was on the second floor, with big windows that let in lots of light and a blackboard that took up most of one wall. There were desks for 30 students, and Mr. Wilson explained that she would be teaching children aged 6 to 12, all in one room as was common in rural schools. The other teachers were polite but reserved, clearly waiting to see if this young woman from back east could handle the job. Penelope felt their skepticism, but refused to let it shake her confidence. She had not come this far to fail. When she emerged from the school an hour later, Kieran was sitting on the front steps, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "How did it go?" "Good, I think. I start on Monday. That gives me a few days to prepare." She sat down beside him. "What is that you are making?" "A horse," Kieran said, showing her the partially carved figure. "Habit I picked up from my father. Keeps my hands busy." They walked back toward Mrs. Fletcher's house, taking the long way through town so Penelope could get her bearings. Helena was bustling with activity, wagons rolling down the main street, people going about their business. There was a general store, a bank, a doctor's office, a church, 2 saloons, and various other shops and businesses. "It is bigger than I expected," Penelope admitted. "It has grown a lot in the past few years," Kieran said. "Gold mining brings people and people bring business. It is a good town, though, not as rough as some of the mining camps I have seen." They were passing the general store when a man called out, "Kieran Ellis, that really you?" Kieran turned and broke into a genuine smile. "Jack Morrison, I did not know you were in Helena." The man who approached was about Kieran's age, with sandy hair and a friendly, open face. He clasped Kieran's hand and slapped him on the shoulder. "Got here 2 weeks ago. Bought a small ranch about 5 miles north of town. Heard you took care of that mountain lion that was killing my stock." "I did. Glad I could help." Jack's eyes shifted to Penelope with open curiosity. Kieran made the introductions, explaining how they had met. Jack listened with growing amazement. "You are one lucky lady, Miss Barrett. If anyone could have kept you alive through that storm, it is Kieran." He turned back to Kieran. "Listen, I was going to send word to Taylor to see if you were available for work. I have been having trouble with wolves getting into my stock, and I need someone to track them down. You interested?" "Very," Kieran said. "When do you need me to start?" "Soon as possible. The wolves hit 2 nights ago, killed 3 sheep. I cannot afford to keep losing stock." They agreed that Kieran would ride out to the ranch the next day to assess the situation. Jack invited them both to dinner at his ranch that Sunday, and Kieran accepted after checking with Penelope. "My wife Sarah would love the company," Jack said. "She has been lonely out there with me gone most days working the ranch." After Jack left, Kieran and Penelope continued their walk. "That was fortunate timing," Penelope observed. "Very," Kieran agreed. "Jack is good people. We worked together a few times back when I was first starting out as a tracker. If he needs help, I am glad to give it." They spent the rest of the morning exploring Helena, and Kieran bought Penelope lunch at a small cafe near the church. Over sandwiches and coffee, they talked about everything and nothing, learning each other in the way new couples do. Kieran told her about growing up on the trail, about learning to hunt and track from his father, about the first time he had successfully followed a trail that had stumped more experienced trackers. Penelope told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her love of books and learning, about the frustration of being told her dreams were inappropriate for a woman. "Your father was a fool," Kieran said bluntly. "Any man who cannot see your strength and intelligence does not deserve to be part of your life." "He meant well," Penelope said, though without much conviction. "He just wanted me to be safe and provided for. You can be safe and still make your own choices. The two are not mutually exclusive. When Kieran walked her back to Mrs. Fletcher's that afternoon, he seemed reluctant to leave. "I should head out to Jack's ranch," he said. "Start working on that wolf problem, but I will be back in time for dinner on Sunday and we can ride out there together." "Be careful," Penelope said. "Always am." He kissed her softly. "I will see you soon." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Penelope spent hours planning lessons, familiarizing herself with the books and materials available at the school, and getting to know the other boarders at Mrs. Fletcher's. Two of them were seamstresses who worked at a dress shop, and they welcomed Penelope warmly, offering advice about life in Helena. Kieran stopped by each evening after working on Jack's ranch, always clean and polite, always careful to leave before it got too late. He told her about tracking the wolves to their den in the hills, about the careful planning needed to deal with them without endangering the sheep. Mrs. Fletcher began setting an extra place at dinner without being asked, and the other boarders grew accustomed to seeing him. On Sunday morning, Kieran arrived with Duke saddled and a gentle mare he had borrowed from Jack for Penelope to ride. They rode out to the Morrison ranch together, the winter sun bright and the air so cold it hurt to breathe. The ranch was modest but well kept, with a small house, a barn, and fenced pastures where sheep grazed. Sarah Morrison met them at the door, a woman about Penelope's age with dark hair and a warm smile. "You must be Miss Barrett. Jack has told me all about you. Come in, you must be frozen." The house was cozy and warm, and Sarah had prepared a feast of roasted pork, potatoes, vegetables, and apple pie. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily. Sarah was from Oregon originally, and she and Jack had met when he went there to buy breeding stock for his ranch. "It is lonely sometimes," Sarah admitted. "The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, and I do not get to town often. But Jack is wonderful, and we are building something together. That makes it worthwhile." After dinner, while Jack and Kieran discussed the wolf problem in detail, Sarah pulled Penelope aside. "He is in love with you, you know," she said quietly. "Kieran, I mean. Jack says he has never seen Kieran look at anyone the way he looks at you." "We have only known each other a week," Penelope said, but her heart soared at Sarah's words. "Sometimes that is all it takes. Jack and I knew within days that we would marry. When it is right, it is right." Sarah squeezed her hand. "I hope we can be friends, Penelope." "I could use a friend out here." "I would like that very much," Penelope said warmly. The ride back to Helena that evening was peaceful, the stars brilliant overhead. Kieran and Penelope rode side by side in comfortable silence for a while before Kieran spoke. "I finished with the wolves today. Found the den and dealt with all 3 of them. Jack paid me $50, which is more than generous. That is wonderful. It is enough to live on for a few months if I am careful, which means I can stay in Helena at least for a while." He paused. "Unless you want me to leave. If I am being too forward, moving too fast, just say the word." Penelope reined in her horse and Kieran did the same, turning Duke to face her. "I do not want you to leave," she said clearly. "I want you to stay. I want to see where this goes. I want to spend time with you and learn everything about you and—" She stopped, suddenly shy. "And what?" Kieran prompted gently. "And I think I might be falling in love with you," Penelope finished in a rush. "I know it is too soon to say that, but it is true, and I am tired of hiding how I feel." Kieran dismounted and came to her horse, reaching up to help her down. When her feet touched the ground, he kept his hands on her waist, looking down at her in the starlight. "It is not too soon," he said. "Because I am falling in love with you too. Have been since the moment you walked into that storm looking for help, so determined to survive. You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, Penelope Barrett." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Penelope wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Penelope laughed, giddy with joy. "We have known each other a week. I do not care. Marry me, not right away if you do not want to rush. We can wait a few months, do this properly. But marry me, Penelope. Be my wife." She should say no. Should be practical, sensible, all the things she had been raised to be. But she had not come to Montana to be sensible. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Kieran let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. He set her down and kissed her again, gentler this time, full of promise and hope. "We should tell Mrs. Fletcher," Penelope said when they finally remembered they were standing on a dark road in freezing temperatures. "And I suppose I should write to my father." "Will he be angry?" "Probably," Penelope admitted, "but he will come around eventually. He loves me, even if he does not always show it well." They rode the rest of the way to town in a daze of happiness, making plans. They agreed to wait 3 months before marrying, to give Penelope time to settle into her teaching position and Kieran time to find steady work. They would live in Helena, where Penelope's job was, and Kieran would take tracking jobs within a day's ride so he could come home regularly. Mrs. Fletcher was delighted when they told her, insisting on opening a bottle of wine she had been saving for a special occasion. The other boarders congratulated them, and Mrs. Fletcher said Penelope could stay in her current room until the wedding. "After that, you will want your own home," she said practically. "But there are several small houses for rent in town, nothing fancy but clean and well built." Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Penelope threw herself into teaching and found she loved it even more than she had hoped. Her students were eager to learn, and she made the lessons as engaging as possible, incorporating stories and practical examples. Even the skeptical male teachers began to grudgingly respect her methods when they saw how well her students were progressing. Kieran found work with various ranchers around Helena, tracking predators and solving problems. He was gone sometimes for days at a time, but he always came back to Penelope, and she learned to live with the worry that came with loving a man who worked in dangerous situations. In February, a letter arrived from Penelope's father. She opened it with trepidation, but found it was more sad than angry. He wrote that while he did not understand her choices, he wanted her to be happy, and if this Kieran Ellis made her happy, then he supposed that would have to be enough. He enclosed a bank draft for $500 as a wedding present, which made Penelope cry. "He does love you," Kieran said, reading over her shoulder. "He just shows it differently than you need." "I know," Penelope said. "Maybe someday he will visit and meet you properly." "I would like that." They found a small house to rent on the edge of town with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room. It needed work, but Kieran spent his free time repairing the roof, fixing the windows, and building new furniture. Penelope sewed curtains and cushions, and slowly the house became a home. In March, just before the wedding, Sarah Morrison came to town and threw Penelope a party with the other women from church and the school. It was a simple affair, but filled with laughter and genuine warmth. Penelope had made real friends in Helena, and the realization made her happy beyond words. The wedding was on the first Saturday in April, at the small church in town. The minister who performed the ceremony was the same one who had married Jack and Sarah, and he seemed genuinely pleased to be joining 2 people so obviously in love. Penelope wore a dress Sarah had helped her make, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk. Kieran wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed, and when Penelope walked down the aisle and saw him waiting for her, his eyes full of love and wonder, She knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. They spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life brought. When the minister pronounced them married and Kieran kissed her, the small church erupted in applause. The reception was held at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, which she had decorated with spring flowers and ribbons. There was food and music, and Jack Morrison played the fiddle while people danced. Penelope danced with Kieran, with Jack, with Mr. Wilson from the school, feeling more joyful than she had ever thought possible. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Kieran and Penelope slipped away to their little house. Kieran carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down in the sitting room. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, as if testing out the name. "Mr. Ellis," she replied, smiling. He kissed her tenderly, then with growing passion, and Penelope responded in kind. They made their way to the bedroom, helping each other out of their wedding clothes, learning each other's bodies with gentle hands and whispered words. That night was everything Penelope had hoped for, and nothing like the clinical, vaguely frightening descriptions she had heard from married women. Kieran was patient and loving, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, two people becoming one. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Kieran's arm around her, Penelope's head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I love you too," Kieran replied, kissing the top of her head. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the certainty of their love. The months that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Kieran continued to find work as a tracker, though he turned down jobs that would take him too far from home or keep him away too long. Penelope continued teaching, and word of her innovative methods spread. Parents began requesting that their children be placed in her class. In July, Penelope realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another 2 weeks to be sure, then told Kieran one evening after dinner. He was quiet for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy," Kieran laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Penelope, I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled." They told their friends the news and everyone was delighted. Sarah Morrison was especially excited, as she was expecting her own first child. Mrs. Fletcher knitted tiny blankets and booties, and the women from church organized to make sure Penelope had everything she would need. Penelope continued teaching through the fall, though she grew increasingly tired as her belly swelled. Mr. Wilson finally insisted she take leave in December, and a substitute was brought in to finish out the school year. Penelope was reluctant to stop working, but she had to admit she needed the rest. Kieran became even more protective, barely willing to let her out of his sight. He took only the shortest, safest jobs and spent hours making a cradle for the baby, carving intricate designs into the wood. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Penelope told him one evening as she watched him work. "I hope so," Kieran said. "I want to be better than my father was. He loved me, I know that, but he was not around much, always chasing the next job, the next opportunity. I want to be there for our child." "You will be," Penelope assured him. The baby came on a cold February night after hours of labor that left Penelope exhausted and Kieran white-faced with worry. But when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Penelope's arms, all the pain was forgotten. "A boy," the midwife announced, "healthy and strong." Kieran stared at his son with wonder, reaching out with one finger to touch the tiny hand. The baby immediately gripped his finger, and Kieran's eyes filled with tears. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father." They named him Samuel after Kieran's father, with the middle name James for Penelope's brother who had died in childhood. He was a good baby, healthy and alert, with Kieran's dark hair and Penelope's blue eyes. Those first months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes, but Penelope had never been happier. Watching Kieran with Samuel, seeing the gentle way he held his son and the awe in his eyes, made her fall in love with him all over again. As Samuel grew, Kieran taught him about the world outside their door, taking him on walks through town and short rides into the countryside. Penelope returned to teaching part-time when Samuel was 6 months old, leaving him with Mrs. Fletcher during the day. It was hard to be away from him, but she loved her work too much to give it up entirely. Years passed, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. When Samuel was 3, Penelope became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine. 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named William. Kieran built them a larger house on the outskirts of Helena, with enough room for their growing family and a barn for the horses. He had become one of the most sought-after trackers in Montana and could afford to be selective about his jobs. He still traveled for work, but never for more than a few days at a time, and he always came home to Penelope and the children. Penelope eventually became the headmistress of the Helena school, a position she held with pride and dedication. She hired more female teachers, believing strongly that women brought unique perspectives to education. Her methods became known throughout Montana, and educators from other towns came to observe her classes. Sarah and Jack Morrison became their closest friends. Sarah gave birth to 3 children of her own, and the 2 families spent countless Sundays together, the children playing while the adults talked and laughed. Jack and Kieran went into business together, breeding horses on Jack's ranch, and it proved lucrative. Penelope's father visited once when Samuel was 5. He stayed for 2 weeks, and by the end of it, he had grudgingly admitted that Kieran was a good man and Penelope had chosen well. He never fully understood why she had left Philadelphia, but he saw that she was happy, and that was enough. The letter Penelope wrote to her father after he left was full of love and gratitude. She thanked him for giving her the education that had made her independence possible, even if that had not been his intention. He wrote back that he was proud of her, which made her cry happy tears. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kieran took Penelope back to the spot where they had first met, where he had given her his fire. It was summer this time, warm and green instead of frozen and deadly. They left the children with Mrs. Fletcher and rode out together, just the 2 of them. "Do you remember?" Kieran asked as they stood beneath the trees. "Every moment," Penelope said. "I remember thinking I was going to die and then seeing your fire. It was like a miracle." "You were the miracle," Kieran said. "I was just living my life, doing what I always did, and then you stumbled into my camp and everything changed. You made me want more than I had ever wanted before. A home, a family, a future. You gave me all of that," Penelope said. "You gave me everything." "You said you had nothing to give," Kieran reminded her. "That night when I shared my fire with you, you said you had nothing to give me in return. And you said to give you tomorrow," Penelope finished, smiling at the memory. "So I did, and the day after that and the day after that." "All the tomorrows," Kieran said, pulling her close. "That is what you gave me, all the tomorrows we will ever have." He kissed her there under the Montana sky in the place where their story had begun, and Penelope kissed him back with all the love in her heart. They had built a life together from nothing but a fire and a storm and the courage to take a chance on love. It had been worth every risk. As they rode back to Helena that evening, Penelope thought about the young woman who had left Philadelphia with nothing but dreams and determination. She had been so afraid, so uncertain, but she had kept moving forward. And she had found more than she ever could have imagined. She had found home. She had found love. She had found herself. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new adventures and challenges. Samuel grew into a serious young man who loved books as much as his mother, and he eventually became a teacher himself. Catherine was wild and free like her father, happiest when she was outdoors, and she learned tracking from Kieran, becoming one of the few female trackers in Montana. William had a gift for working with horses, and he took over the breeding business with Jack Morrison when he came of age. Kieran and Penelope grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They watched their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, mourned losses and celebrated victories. Mrs. Fletcher passed away when Penelope was 40, leaving her the boarding house in her will. Penelope turned it into a home for young women coming west to work, offering them safe lodging and guidance, just as Mrs. Fletcher had done for her. Many teachers, seamstresses, and shopgirls found their start there, and Penelope took pride in helping them build their lives. Jack Morrison died of a heart attack when he was 55, leaving Sarah devastated. But she was strong, and with Penelope's help and her children's support, she kept the ranch running. Kieran made sure to check on her regularly, honoring the friendship that had meant so much to all of them. When Kieran turned 60, he finally retired from tracking. His knees were not what they had been, and Penelope worried every time he went out. He said he was ready to stay home anyway, to spend his days with her and their grandchildren, to work in the garden and carve toys for the little ones. Penelope retired from the school at the same time, handing over her position to one of her former students, a bright young woman who shared her passion for innovative teaching. It felt right to pass the torch to the next generation. They spent their retirement years traveling around Montana, visiting their children and grandchildren, taking trips to places they had always wanted to see. They went to Yellowstone and marveled at the geysers. They visited the mining towns in the mountains. They spent a month in Oregon with Sarah, who had moved there to be near her daughter. Through it all, they remained deeply in love, still holding hands like newlyweds, still stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking. Their children teased them about it, but Penelope could see the love and admiration in their eyes. She and Kieran had shown them what a true partnership looked like, what it meant to choose each other every day. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a huge party in Helena. It seemed like the whole town turned out to celebrate. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears. Samuel stood up and told the story of how his parents had met, that his mother had nearly frozen to death in a blizzard, and his father had saved her life with a simple fire. And when my mother said she had nothing to give in return, Samuel concluded, my father told her to give him tomorrow. She gave him 50 years of tomorrows, and they gave us the greatest gift children can receive, the example of true love. Penelope cried and Kieran held her close, his own eyes wet. They danced together that night, slowly because their bodies were old now, but the feeling was the same as it had been at their wedding. Love, pure and simple and true. A few years later, Kieran's health began to fail. His heart was giving out, the doctor said, worn down by decades of hard living and hard work. Penelope nursed him devotedly, and he bore his illness with the same quiet strength he had brought to everything in his life. One spring evening, with Penelope sitting beside his bed holding his hand, Kieran looked at her with those amber eyes she had fallen in love with so long ago. "You remember the fire?" he asked, his voice weak but clear. "Every day of my life," Penelope said. "I knew then," Kieran said. The moment I saw you stumbling through that snow, I knew you were going to change my life. I did not know how, but I knew." "You changed mine," Penelope said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me everything, Kieran, everything I could have ever wanted." "All those tomorrows," Kieran whispered. "Every single one was worth it." He closed his eyes then, and Penelope felt the moment he slipped away, the hand in hers going slack. She sat there for a long time, crying, grieving, but also grateful. They had been given so much time, so much love. Not everyone was that lucky. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over Montana to pay their respects. Kieran had touched many lives, had been respected and loved. Penelope stood strong through it all, supported by her children and grandchildren, by Sarah and the friends they had made over the decades. In the weeks after Kieran's death, Penelope found herself returning to their house on the edge of town, to the life they had built together. It was quiet without him, emptier, but it was still full of his presence, of memories of their life together. She found the carved wooden horse he had been making the day they met, carefully preserved in a box in his workshop. She found letters she had written to him during his tracking trips, tied with ribbon. She found a journal he had kept, full of his thoughts about her, about their children, about the life they had built. One entry, dated the day after their wedding, made her cry anew. He had written, "Married Penelope today. Still cannot believe she said yes, that she chose me. I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure she never regrets it." "I never did," Penelope whispered to the empty room, "not for a single moment." She lived for 5 more years after Kieran's death, surrounded by family and friends, still active and engaged with the world. She attended her grandchildren's weddings, met her great-grandchildren, continued to advocate for women's education. But she never stopped missing Kieran, never stopped feeling the absence of his hand in hers, his voice in her ear, his presence at her side. They had been 2 halves of one whole, and without him, she always felt slightly off balance. When Penelope finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74, her family gathered to mourn and celebrate her life. They buried her next to Kieran in the cemetery overlooking Helena, with the mountains in the distance. On her gravestone, her children had carved the words that had started it all. She gave him all her tomorrows. And on Kieran's stone, right beside it, they had added, "And he made every one of them count." Their story became legend in Helena, passed down through generations. The schoolhouse Penelope had run was renamed in her honor. The boarding house she had maintained became a historical landmark. The trails Kieran had blazed through the Montana wilderness were still used by ranchers and hunters. But more than any of that, their legacy lived on in the family they had created, in children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their love forward, who understood what it meant to take a chance on love, to give someone your tomorrows and trust them to make them matter. Because in the end, that was what love was. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, but the daily choice to give yourself to another person, to share your life and your tomorrows, to build something together that was greater than either of you could have built alone. Kieran had given Penelope his fire when she was freezing, and she had given him all her tomorrows in return. And from that simple exchange, from that moment of kindness and connection in a Montana blizzard, had grown a love story for the ages, a love that had lasted a lifetime. A love that had changed not just 2 lives, but generations of lives. A love that proved, beyond any doubt, that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and that sometimes giving someone tomorrow is enough to build forever.